Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I am super excited to be joined by Anthony Pierri, who is really like Anthony. I got to say, like, you're one of the top voices that I've been following around product marketing on LinkedIn. And I'm super excited that you made the time to join us today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Really excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And your graphics on LinkedIn just crush it. So again, I'm sort of like a little super fan here. Why don't you take a quick second to maybe just tell folks a little bit about your career background and how'd you get into product marketing?
Yep. Like most of the people in product marketing, I didn't grow up wanting to be a product marketer. Kind of stumbled into the role through a weird series of turns. Um, I had a lot of different roles and responsibilities over the years, but kind of the unifying theme was always content creation. So in every job that I always had, there would always be some aspect of me creating content for a channel or something along those lines. And I'd had varying degrees of success across Twitter and YouTube and Instagram and things like that. So I was working at an agency that did a lot of like product strategy and product development and product design, and was doing some longer term engagements with some people on the team. And then over time, kind of realized that a lot of the startups we tried to work with didn't really want to pay for product strategy. They were like, well, that's my role. I'm the founder. I can't outsource my strategy. And so then when we realized is if we repositioned ourselves as doing product marketing, the founders suddenly were very, very interested, even though a lot of product marketing is what strategy, who are you going after, how are you trying to reach them? And it would be all of the same types of questions framed not under the product, but more on the marketing side.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, tons of these founders were super, super interested. So did that with a partner of mine as part of this other agency. And then more recently, we've spun off and we have our own 2-person agency that just does product marketing for early stage startups, primarily facing these positioning and messaging challenges. And the name of the agency is Fletch.
Fletch. Yep. Absolutely. Question. And I know this seems like a simple question. It's just that I sort of like have seen the definition of product marketing run the gamut from some organizations are like super strategic, high level stuff to the other side where, you're literally like creating sales collateral and getting your hands dirty. What would you say is your definition of product marketing right now?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to say it is how you explain the product to different users and audiences in the way to make it as clear and compelling as possible. And so it's one step removed from the actual asset creation in the sense that product marketing could work with a salesperson who makes the decks, and product marketing essentially feeds them with the messages. As the role gets more mature in a company, a lot of times someone will get assigned in the product marketing team around a specific type of message. So they might say, I'm the sales enablement person on the product marketing team, and
Mm.
I just do sales enablement for salespeople. Another person say, I might be a product marketer who's assigned with taking our strategic messaging and positioning and putting it into onboarding flows. So I work with the product to make sure that the product team to make sure that it's getting explained and fleshed out the best. But really, it is that fundamental piece of who are we going after? Who are we targeting? Why are we targeting them? What are we going to say to them when we get in front of them? All in relation to the product. So when you get to a large company that has many, many different products, that's where like brand messaging comes into play, because you're no longer just speaking at the level of product for the whole company. But in the early stages, product marketing and like brand marketing are kind of interchangeable
Mm.
because you only have one product to work with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I've said this a couple times as I've interviewed folks. It feels like the product marketer is an extension of the founder team, right? Just
Definitely.
because, like, in all my experience, all my 20 something years of being in the startup founder kind of ecosystem and game, what you're telling me right now, like, how do you communicate what you do to specific audiences? And in the case of a startup early stage, you're like trying to narrow that down. I mean, hopefully, right, you're narrowing that down to one, that's maybe two or so. I don't want to generalize, but ICPs or audiences or personas, and then trying to figure out what that messaging is, and then ultimately that be something that resonates with that persona. So that's why that feels like, and like that founder, and that's that founder doing that early on, right? What would you say from your experience right now working with early stage startups are some of those early sort of priorities that you should be making sure, if you had a checklist, right? Making sure you're following to balance the, hey, I am building this product and there are these capabilities. There's this early persona I'm going after, and I need to have some messaging that actually like resonates with that persona. Also understanding that it's sort of, it changes, right? And it's constantly changing, it seems. Any sort of advice you would give folks around that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, a lot of the stuff you just said is true if the founder is more product marketing minded,
Hmm.
even if they don't call it that. If they're thinking about, I'm trying to find a group of people to help and serve, 9 times out of 10, founder teams are consisting of a builder and a seller. And the builder, the technical person, and the seller is just going out there trying to evangelize the product to customers and to investors. And usually the seller is like, I'm just trying to find anyone who can use this, who would care about this. If you're actually thinking about personas and ICPs and stuff like that, that really means that you have someone who's thinking from a product marketing perspective. That's very rare at the founder level. Usually that comes in later. So there's this period, we worked with a client, they called it the flailing arms period, where you're just trying to get customers wherever you can find them. And so a lot of times, if that's the case, it is really helpful to bring in a product marketer who can come in and start to kind of sift through the giant product vision of, we're going to create this platform with this massive TAM. We're going to be the next unicorn, and can actually start to break up that market into market segments and say, okay, well, if we're going to reach this giant market, we probably can't get them all at once. We're not going to be running Super Bowl ads as an early stage startup that have every possible person imaginable. So really, how are we going to get groups of people to start using it? And so, like we like to say, the best way to win a market is conquer it segment by segment. And so that market, the product marketer can come in and start to break that down of like, who are the different types of segments that exist? How would we explain the product and position it differently depending on who we're talking to? But I would say, even if you can have a product marketer, or at least product marketing minded founder in your original founding team, it will make the whole journey so much easier, because that person from the beginning will be thinking like that. Before you write the first line of code, they're going to be thinking, all right, what's our hypothesis of a group of people who could use this and we could commercialize this product? Actually, like even a hypothetical product, how would we commercialize it? Versus most of the founding teams are like, we've got an idea. It seems pretty cool. I bet we could build it. They build it. And then they're like, all right, who wants it? And even with all the different materials out there, the Y Combinator startup school, the lean startup, no matter how many times you say, don't build first, figure out who needs a problem and then build later once you validate. No matter how many times you say that, that is still the default way that 99% of all founders operate. And so the product marketer in the early days would be very, very helpful in kind of counteracting that, being like, we actually have to pick people to use this, to sell this to. And if we don't choose anyone, there's no chance that we're going to win that giant market.
Absolutely. It's interesting you say that, because I had never thought about it from that perspective, that like that behavior is actually product marketing behavior, right? For me, it was just best practices as a founder, maybe just because like personally, I've done so many startup ventures over the years, and most of the time they have failed because there's that lack of focus and nobody knows what the hell we're actually or who we're building for. And you're right, like there's that tendency to just start to want to build stuff, and then you build stuff and nobody cares, right?
Mhm.
For a variety of reasons. What tips would you give organizations out there early on around how do I start to develop, what are the day-to-day sort of processes or tactics that I can start to implement to start to develop like that early positioning, that early messaging, let's say on the website?
Yep. So we have a framework that we've been building with a lot of these startups. Part of the reason why we didn't choose to do long-term consulting engagements was that we are trying to make this framework stronger. So we need to run it through a ton of different startups. And so the people who worked with us at the beginning, they were getting essentially a V1 of the framework. So it was a little rougher. And now, we've done 50 some iterations on it. It's much stronger. It's much more robust with all the edge cases that we've encountered. What happens when we have an open source company, right? Like that's a whole different model. What happens if we have like an extremely horizontal like tools thing where it's like can be used by all these different people for different use cases. So essentially what we've been realizing is as we've crossed across all these different use cases, in the early days, positioning is going to be based on one of these 6 different elements. So it's going to be based on a who. If you've, even with your product vision from day one, you say, I'm building a product for, I don't know, mining companies. If you pick a who, that's going to kind of determine what types of features and things that you build. So you could position around the who, you could position around a problem. So like we like to use the example of Calendly. Calendly early days was used by a lot of different people for different reasons, but it's primarily solving the problem of it's annoying to book meetings back and forth over email. And whether I'm a consultant or a salesperson or a, freelancer, that problem is the same. So they were able to get data across all their different users and then eventually figure out who were some of the good groups to target, but they still had a unifying positioning around the problem. Another example is positioning around a feature. And this is usually like if you have some crazy feature that no one else has. I think of like the first phones that could fold in half, right? I don't know what problem that solves. I don't know what person that's for. I don't even know what benefit that's going to give me. It's just like a really cool thing that the phone can fold in half now, like a smartphone that can, whatever. So essentially that feature is what they would position around. You can also position around a capability, which is like a new unlock, something your product does that no one really could do before. So slightly different nuance than a feature of like part of the product. It's what would I do with it? So I think of the example of Uber. With Uber, the capability was I can click a button on my phone and someone will come and pick me up and drive me somewhere. Again, lots of different reasons why you would want that. You could be going to a party and you're going to drink at the party and you want to, don't have a designated driver. Uber becomes your designated driver. Or you live in an urban city and you don't have a car, or you're a traveler. So you have this horizontal market with all these different people, but a unified positioning around the new capability that you've unlocked. Another one might be like a benefit. So there's a LinkedIn guy on LinkedIn that I'm friends with, and his value proposition is I'll get you to 50,000 followers in your first year. You don't know how he's going to do it. You don't know what the methods are, his process. Is he a content? You don't know anything, but you know the benefit, and it's such a compelling benefit that's like the key positioning that actually helps him get a foothold for lots of people who would want to grow their LinkedIn followings for different reasons. And then the final one is the product category. A lot of times, if you are entering a mature market as a startup, like say you're building a new web browser, you can basically position knowing that everyone knows what a web browser is and say why you're different. So when the Brave web browser came out, really, really strong competition from Google and Apple and Firefox and all these different companies. And so what they did is we said, we're the web browser, but we don't take your data. So it's a privacy oriented. Lots of different people are going to care about privacy for different reasons, but it was enough of a positioning that they could gain a foothold in the mind of the customer. And they could say, no matter who it is, which one's the privacy oriented one? Oh, that's Brave. So it's usually one of those 6 different elements that helps you in the early days before you've really figured out exactly which segments you're going to target with like dedicated go-to-market motions.
Awesome. That browser analogy reminds me of DuckDuckGo, the search engine, right?
Same deal.
How granular do you get? This is one thing that I've struggled with as a founder over the years, in that, especially if you're trying to raise capital. Like I've done a lot of incubators, right, over the course of the years. And so, it's sort of this fight between, or this balance between, well, sometimes a fight, between like big vision, and then very actionable, very focused persona, use case, value proposition based messaging. And often it's, I guess maybe, now that I'm articulating it, out externally, it's like, there's a lot of founders that get caught up in this like positioning for venture investors or investors, and then versus actual customers. And then the other thing is, like, I think even if you just focus on the customer persona, how deep do you get, right? And any advice around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have multiple levels. Your highest level message is probably for investors and future employees that you're trying to hire. So when you talk to investors or employees, you have to give the picture that you're going to change the world. This is
Mhm.
going to be a $1 billion market opportunity. We're going to fundamentally change this industry, stuff like that. That's what investors get excited about, and that's what employees get excited about. I want to work for this startup. Might take a lower salary than I could get at Amazon or Google to work with this startup because I believe in the vision that they're trying to create. So that's like your highest level one. At the next level down is kind of like your company level positioning for today, which is like if your name comes up in conversation within a broad market, will people have something to think about? Will they say, oh, DuckDuckGo, that's the search engine, but with privacy? So you need a company level positioning. And then one level deeper is like a go to market level positioning. And that actually is multiple positionings depending on the group of people you're talking to. So, for example, even if you might have the same underlying technology, when you're talking to each individual, you want to make it feel like you've created the software or whatever the product is directly for the people you're talking to. So, for example, if you take Asana, no, actually, let's take Airtable. Airtable is a very multi-use case platform. But what they've done, especially with their focus on creating templates, is that when they're targeting small businesses, they say we are a lightweight CRM. And they actually choose a different product category than they might choose if they were talking to marketing teams, where they might say, you know, we're the one-stop shop to make your next, like to coordinate your next marketing plan or whatever it might be. So you essentially have these three levels. You have the big vision one, you have the company level one, and then you have these individual segment-based sub positionings for everyone that you're going after. And you can choose different product categories. You can highlight different capabilities, different features, and the benefit and the value is going to be all different depending on who you're talking to. But that's the only way to actually win over the segments. If you just give them the high level thing, it's not going to be enough for them to take action. You have to actually show them what are like the struggling moments in your day that can be solved with our platform. And we like that phrase, struggling moment. It comes from jobs to be done theory, I think originally, but rather than like these meta level problems, which is like our data is siloed, that's not enough to make you take action. Or like I like to use the example of 1Password is a password manager.
Mhm.
You know, you could say storing your your passwords on a piece of paper, that's not very secure. It's like, yeah, okay, you know, but it's working fine for me. But if you focus on that struggling moment of like, did you just get locked out of your, you know, Google account for the fourth time and you can't find the paper? I think it creates a much more meaningful reason to convert and take action on the page or wherever you're seeing that CTA. So we say like when it gets to the really low granular level, you almost want to be shrinking the product, right? For investors, you want to say it's way bigger than it is now. It's going to be a movement. It's going to be a platform. And then when you talk to today's customers, you want to be like shrinking it so that they're like, I'll give it a try, because you're trying to get them to take action. And most people don't take action if it's a giant, massive enterprise platform that they think, oh, I'm going to have to get all my teams on board. Even if you're selling enterprise software, you still want to probably come in through a point solution through one specific department.
You know, that really resonates specifically around, you know, category creation. When there's not an existing category, like how do you communicate something that maybe hasn't existed before? And so like really dialing in the jobs to be done kind of framework, but even more deeper than that, I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, just real quick, because I know we're almost up here of, you know, with time, and thank you again so much for your time. You know, in terms of like product led growth versus traditional models, you know, I think it's in my experience, but also what I've just seen talking to several founders and GTM professionals over the last couple of years. It's like, how do you sort of start to think about um, you know, that messaging and positioning from a, you know, self-serve product-led growth perspective versus maybe something that a human is doing more hands-on, and then in terms of like understanding performance or what's being more effective or not being effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the early days of a startup, it's almost always more valuable to do some iteration of founder-led sales, even if your goal is to make a self-serve motion right away. The first, I don't know, depending on what your sales cycle is and what your product is, right? The number can vary, but your first bunch of customers, you should be pitching it as a human to another human, because you're going to learn so much more than just turning on a self-serve motion and letting it run and seeing who comes in or who doesn't.
Totally.
So I think every founder should always go through that founder-led sales period. But then when you're transitioning into these more formalized go-to-market strategies, right? Like, or growth levers, as you could say, sales-led or product-led, the way that we think about product-led is really like mirroring not even what other B2B companies do, but we actually see a bigger parallel with direct-to-consumer products. So in D2C world, you get an ad on Instagram, and the Instagram ad is incredibly specific on a struggling moment, right? It's like it used to be like infomercials that would play late at night about a new type of gadget or something, and you'd show people fumbling around, making mistakes, dropping stuff, and then this new thing solves the problem. And now it's like Instagram ads or TikTok ads or whatever are the equivalent of that, where they're like, does this bother you when this happens? And it's an incredibly specific thing. And then they pivot to the solution. And then when you click the ad, and Instagram has been getting better and better. Now I'm actually clicking the ads where it wasn't that good. And now it's like, I feel like I'm getting, it's too personalized now. So I'll click these ads, and where does it take me? It takes me to a detailed product page. I can see exactly what I'm going to get, how it's going to work, because they're trying to get me to take action. Product-led growth companies, it's the same underlying concept. You need to hit them where they're at, whether it's a organic channel, like with content marketing, or it's an ad or whatever it is. And you want to mimic that same journey that you would see in a D2C flow, and essentially get them to understand the product as quickly as possible and get them into the product as quickly as possible. So like, I like to use the example too of with like B2C companies, like, did you ever play the iPhone game Temple Run back in the day?
I
Or
know
like,
of it. Yeah.
or like Fruit Ninja was another one. Like,
Fruit Ninja. Yep.
salesperson had to convince you to try Temple Run. You heard about it and you got in the product. So the product-led growth experience is the same deal, where you're trying to remove as much friction as possible, so they just slide into the product, and then they're going to see and experience all the value as quickly as possible. Like when you play Temple Run, you're having fun within the first 5 seconds. You click start and you're in the game. And product-led growth companies do the best when they mimic that incredibly frictionless way to get in the product, and then incredibly fast time to value, like 10 seconds. And they're like already starting to see how they would use it. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. Companies that do better with sales led are ones where the time to value is slower, where it's more going to only work if you have multiple teams involved. You're going to have to get buy-in. The sales led approach is going to make a lot more sense there, because you're actually going to have to convince a lot of different stakeholders. And there isn't an easy way for one group of people to get value from it. And you see this a lot with the platforms where it's like, we integrate all of your different data sources and then give you high level insight. You can't just turn that on. You have to get everyone to give you access to all the integrations. Those ones are not going to work well with product led. And even the other funny thing is that everyone's like, show your pricing on the page. And in most cases, that's probably true, but there are some cases where it is two different, variable cost is so high, depending on the number of integrations, connections, and things like that. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to show the pricing, because it can either make it seem way more expensive than it would be for you, or way cheaper than it's going to be, depending on all these different factors. And you could argue, well, you need to just change the product so it's easier. That's a different conversation. But essentially, that's how we think about those two different growth levels as it relates to messaging, and like even just getting them to use the product.
Anthony, I feel like we could talk for hours here about all these topics and the plethora of knowledge you bring to the table. Thank you so much. If folks wanted to, follow you on social, maybe learn more about Fletch and its services, what are the best channels or URLs to reach you?
Yeah, so my LinkedIn profile is definitely my most active channel. I essentially add any people who connect with me, unless you're obviously trying to pitch me something, I may not add you, but I usually connect with everyone. So feel free to shoot me a connect request and a DM. And then you could always check out our website. It's fletchpmm.com. And that kind of gives an overview of how we work with startups.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Definitely. You too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.